This is a strange time of year because 18 teams are done, 14 teams are playing. And for the 18 teams that are done, now a third of them are looking for coaches. And we already knew going into yesterday of 3 vacancies, Detroit, Atlanta, Houston. The Jets joined that group last night when they fired Adam Gase. And then today, 2 more that were expected to happen happened. Let's start with Anthony Lynn, the Chargers coach, 33-31 in 4 seasons, was 12-4 in 2018, made it to the divisional round of the playoffs, upset the Ravens on the road in the wild card round of the playoffs, but a disappointment in 2019. This year, a disappointment, and also too many mistakes, too many opportunities to criticize him. You know, when you're the head coach, you're the guy who's in charge of managing the game and everything else, Charean. When those mistakes are happening, it falls on you, and it's at a certain point it reaches a critical mass, and it's just not sustainable. And I think the Chargers realized during the season it wasn't sustainable. Out of respect to him, no leaks, no discussion, no anything. They just put a pin in it until the season was over. Let him get through the season. Don't create any distractions for him. Respect him that way. But the day after the season ended, that was that.
Mike, the hard thing is when you're a really bad team and you draft a quarterback high, you're usually on notice the next year anyway, and then the coach gets fired, and then that quarterback has to start over again with the head coach and an offensive coordinator and a new system. And we've seen it so many times, and we're seeing it again, unfortunately, to Justin Herbert in this system. He's going to have to start over again with a new head coach, a new offensive coordinator, and a new system. And I'm not going to say that it's going to set him back because he looked really good as a rookie, but it's really hard on these young quarterbacks to have to do that year after year after year. You saw it with Baker Mayfield. I mean, you can name them. There's tons of them who this has happened to, and he's not going to be the last one it happens to, and he's not the only one this year, frankly, that it's happened to. But it's unfortunate for him that he won't be in the same system next year. But you saw it coming from the clock management, the game management, and the losses in the one-score games and giving up leads of 17 points, which Anthony Lynn did consistently. Over the last 2 years, Anthony Lynn was 12-20. It was time to go. We all like Anthony Lynn. The Chargers like Anthony Lynn. He didn't get the job done over the last 2 seasons. It's time to move on to somebody else because this is a team that's ready to win. And I know Bill Parcells has always said, you are what your record says you are. In this case, I think the Chargers are better than what their record says they are based on those one-score losses. And this is a team that's going to be a contender for the postseason next year.
This is a team that's had way too many close games over the past several years. Even when they were 12-4, I remember Phillip Rivers saying the summer after that, we could have been 16-0, we could have been 6-10. And if you're truly going to become a great team, it's not just every week keep it close and hope that it ultimately goes your way. That was the way Brad Childress ran the Vikings. It was keep it close, keep it close, keep it close, wait for a break late in the game, make a break late in the game, try to avoid that break being made against you. And that's a recipe for 8-8. That's a recipe for over the long haul, winning as many as you lose. In the NFL, you have to find that edge where you are winning games by more than a score, where you are dominating. It's not easy to do, but the Bills have found it with Josh Allen, and the Chargers have their Josh Allen in Justin Herbert. The challenge now is to build around him. That's going to be part of what Tom Telesco, the GM of the team, has to do, but it also is going to be incumbent on the coach to win with that talent because they have a lot of talent. And the other thing with the Chargers, and I don't think it's enough to just hire a new coach. They got too many injuries. And anytime there's a team that has an injury problem, at some point I say, where do you start looking at medical staff, training staff, strength and conditioning? Because when you watch all the games at once on a given Sunday, you see plenty of guys get pretzeled up in a way that makes you think they're not getting up. And they get up. So there is something to be said for pliability, as Tom Brady would say, or whatever it is that allows you to take the physical abuse that happens on a football field and not have something break, fracture, sprain, strain, whatever. And when you have a lot of injuries, I think that you're doing something wrong by way of getting your guys ready to be out on the field. So I would take a close look at that if I was the Chargers. That's been one of their issues in recent years. But they've done the hard part. They've gotten the quarterback, Charean, and I think that makes it an attractive job, which also makes it an important hire because they're going to have options, a ton of options. And I'd say behind the Jaguars job that we're going to talk about in a minute, I'd say the Chargers is the second most attractive.
Oh, I love this job. They were 9th in offense and 10th in defense, one of only a handful of teams that finished in the top 10 in both offense and defense. This is a team that's ready to win now based on what Justin Herbert did this season, setting the rookie record for touchdowns, setting the rookie record for completions. He was really good. They just couldn't win those one-score games. 7 of them they lost. And you talked about the injuries. Another problem they've had, and they reassigned their special teams coach during the season, but it didn't work, is special teams. This has been a really bad special teams unit. And when they're this bad, you realize how much special teams mean to a team. They missed 12 field goals, Mike, this year, and they had 1 return for a touchdown. They were last in net punting. I mean, they were awful on special teams, and that will kill a team. It doesn't show up all the time when your special teams are just kind of mediocre, but when they're really bad, it shows up and it hurts you, especially when you're playing all these one-score games. They've got to get special teams right. They've got to get their injuries right. Other than that, this, to me, just looks like one of the best job openings. I mean, you're playing in a great new stadium. You're coaching in L.A. Who wouldn't want to go there? And you've got the core of a team in place that is ready to win now.
And anytime you've got a head coach who personally takes over special teams duties during the season, that means your special teams are a complete and total mess because of all the things a head coach has to do. That's the dirty work that he'd rather not do, that he doesn't have time to do, that does take more time and care than any head coach should have the time to devote to it. And it takes away from your bigger picture decision-making and management of the team and all the things that a head coach has to do. Well, the Chargers will be looking for a head coach. Now, one drawback to that job, you're in the same division as Patrick Mahomes and will be for the next decade or longer, but at least it's a head coaching job, and at least you have a guy that can be groomed into a great quarterback. The Jaguars in the AFC South, a more competitive division, they move on from Doug Marrone, who accomplished the rare feat of losing 15 games in a row in the same season. The 2001 Panthers did that. They won the first game of the year, then lost 15 in a row. And obviously the 2008 Lions and 2017 Browns did that and losing 16 in a row. But Marrone is out, 12-36 in the last 3 seasons after winning the AFC South in 2017 and getting on the brink of Super Bowl 52. Dave Caldwell, the GM's already out. The name that has bubbled to the surface, and if this is some sort of a test that the Jaguars were implementing to see how discreet Urban Meyer is, he's failed. Because as a result of Urban Meyer talking to a lot of different people who he possibly would hire to be on his staff or to serve as the GM, because Urban Meyer apparently will be hiring the GM in Jacksonville if he takes the job, it's become an open secret that job goes to Urban Meyer if he wants it. And that cat's so far out of the bag that if it wasn't accurate, the Jaguars need to come out and disavow. That's how rampant the reporting and the rumors are that it's Urban Meyer's job if he wants it. Now, that kind of turns the Rooney Rule on its head, and it doesn't show the kind of discretion and care that I think the NFL wants its teams to demonstrate in a year where there's going to be some pressure, number one, to over-comply with the Rooney Rule and ultimately pressure on teams to improve the total numbers, because the numbers got to a point last year where it created a discussion point for months, Charean. But in Jacksonville, it looks like Meyer's the guy. You could argue the fact that they fired Marrone means that they think they're getting Urban Meyer, because I think one of the reasons they held on to Marrone was we're going to keep the bird in the hand until we know we can get the two in the bush. But we'll see. And we'll also see whether or not Urban Meyer, if he takes the job, can be a competent NFL head coach. Some people look at it and say, I don't get it. It's no different than Nick Saban. You're a great recruiter. That isn't going to do anything for you at the NFL level.
Well, and we'll see with Matt Rule. Same thing applies to him, and we'll see how he works out. After 1 year, he looks like he's done an okay job, but is he going to win? Is he going to win a Super Bowl in Carolina? It's the same thing when you hire a college coach if you're Jacksonville. Is Urban Meyer, who has been a great college coach, going to be successful at the next level? We've seen it so many times that it hasn't worked with the Chip Kellys and as you mentioned, even Nick Saban, who's the greatest college coach in history, didn't work out for him. So can one of those college coaches now make it work out in the NFL? Maybe so, maybe not. If that's who they want, I think it would be a great hire, considering they do have the number 1 overall pick, and he would get to pick the quarterback that he wants, whether that's Trevor Lawrence, which we presumed for so long, or would it be Justin Fields now, based on the way he played and what he's done and the fact that Urban Meyer has been at Ohio State. So that would be really interesting if that was the hire. And this looks like a great job, Mike, considering the cash that they have next season, the salary cap room, and the fact that all those draft picks they have. However, I paused today when I heard some of Shad Khan's comments that he wants to be in charge. That kind of scared me a little bit, like a mini Jerry Jones. At least Jerry has sort of a football background. He did play at Arkansas, won a national championship. I don't know what kind of football background Shad Khan has, and that's why you hire a GM, and that's why you hire a coach to make those decisions. Is he going to be making a decision on when the rookie quarterback's going to play? Is he going to be making a decision on who the rookie quarterback they draft is?
Let's hear a little bit of Shad Khan from earlier today, and then I'll give you my thoughts on his apparent desire to be heavily involved when we get to the other side.
Certainly, we have a lot of salary cap availability along with the draft picks, and obviously the number 1 pick. What's evaded the history of the Jags really has been a franchise quarterback. And I think what's unique certainly is that we have the ability now to make a choice, and it's going to define the franchise moving forward.
He did comment elsewhere during that session on this notion of having final say. But you know what, Charean? I'm not troubled by that, because every owner does have final say. They run and hide and act like they don't, but they do. They want to be able to blame somebody else. I think Jerry Jones' biggest failure over the last 31 years, and let's face it, if a guy bought a team today and tried to install himself as GM, he would be shouted down by Twitter, by sports radio, by ESPN, Peacock, NBCSN, every cable network out there. You can't do it. It doesn't work that way. You don't just make yourself the GM because once upon a time you played college football. That doesn't qualify you to be the GM. But ultimately, these guys do have their finger on the pulse. They do get what they want. Matt Ryan was an owner's pick, and it worked out in 2008 by Arthur Blank. They were going to go in a different direction. He wanted Matt Ryan. Tua Tagovailoa was an owner's pick in Miami. Again, the owner doesn't come out and say it. Johnny Manziel was an owner's pick in Cleveland. They're not going to come out and say it. They don't want to be perceived as meddling, and they want to reserve the right to blame someone else for their mistakes. So I think Shad Khan is just acknowledging the obvious. At the end of the day, it's his team, and he's got to sign off on these picks. And I think it makes it hard, frankly, to justify Justin Fields over Trevor Lawrence if you are Urban Meyer. Now, I think what you would do is you would try to flip-flop with the Jets, try to grift them that way, slide down a spot, pick up some draft picks, and then take Justin Fields if that's what you want to do. But they so desperately need someone who is going to galvanize the fan base. And I think that's Trevor Lawrence. That's something they've never had, a guy who's going to be that, like Andrew Luck in 2012, the guy who is the clear, obvious focal point of so much discussion, and when he comes to your town, he's going to sell out all the tickets, he's going to sell jerseys, and he's going to make you money. At the end of the day, that's what it's about. You mentioned whether or not Matt Rule's ever going to win a Super Bowl in Carolina. I believe, frankly, that David Tepper doesn't ultimately care about winning Super Bowls as much as he cares about building a team that is competitive every year and maximizes its revenue potential. If you hinge success on winning Super Bowls, you are going to be upset far more often than not. The Patriots have failed 66% of the time when it comes to winning Super Bowls every year. That's not what it's about. It's about having a consistent year in and year out contender, and you hope that you eventually get close enough to the door that you can kick it in and win a championship. And the Jaguars, they had the 1 year in the last 20, the 1 year, and it looked like they were on the front end of something great, and then it all fell apart, and now they're trying to rebuild it. And I don't know. I got to believe that Urban Meyer, when you look at the health issues he had at Florida, the health issues he had at Ohio State, and it may have all fundamentally been driven by stress. That stress, that type A double positive personality that wants to control everything and ultimately can't control the bouncing of a ball, can't control whether or not a referee pulls a yellow flag out of his pocket. There's so much you can't control about football, and it gets worse at the NFL level. That's what drove Nick Saban crazy. That's what drove Nick Saban back to college after only 2 years. And part of me wonders what's really the difference between Nick Saban and Urban Meyer, and will Urban Meyer ultimately say, I can't do this after getting a couple of years under his belt, Charean?
But you do wonder, Mike, if Nick Saban had picked the right quarterback, which was Drew Brees, obviously, as we know, instead of Dante Culpepper back then, if he would have been a success at the NFL level. Maybe he would have been. And that has been the Jaguars' problem, as Shad Khan said. They drafted 3 in the first round, Byron Leftwich, Blaine Gabbert, and Blake Bortles, and none worked out. This one looks like one of the surest things we've ever seen in the NFL. And I'm talking about Trevor Lawrence. Now, if they pick Justin Fields, he looks like he can succeed. But everyone's been on Trevor Lawrence for 2 years, that he is the next coming of Andrew Luck and Peyton Manning and those guys who were surefire #1 overall picks that is going to lead your franchise for a really long time. So you have a chance to do that in Jacksonville if you take that job. Something that Nick Saban didn't have when he got Dante Culpepper instead of Drew Brees.
Yeah, and look, Nick Saban himself has said within the past few years that he would still be the coach of the Dolphins if they had taken Drew Brees. There's no guarantee that Nick Saban was going to groom Drew Brees into the quarterback he became. There was a reason Drew Brees was available as a free agent. The Chargers saw a few years of Brees and said, we need to do better. We can do better. And they got Phillip Rivers, and they let Drew Brees walk away after a couple of years following the drafting of Phillip Rivers. And yeah, look, the Dolphins picked Dante Culpepper with a wrecked knee and gave up a second-round draft selection to get him over Drew Brees, who was free and clear free agent, but he had 26 studs in his shoulder from the injury he suffered in the regular season finale in 2005. But that was Sean Payton and Drew Brees that created something magical. I don't know that it's a given that it would have worked with Nick Saban and Drew Brees, and I don't know that it's a given that's going to work for Urban Meyer. I think that we've – I just think at a certain level, Shad Khan is in bright, shiny object mode, and he is fascinated by having the #1 overall pick, getting Trevor Lawrence, and then being the guy who can go out and hire a name that is on the A-list every year, even though we don't know what that guy's going to be if and when he's an NFL head coach. And we reported today he's looking for $12 million a year, and people are like, oh, $12 million a year. And look, $12 million a year is not unreasonable in today's NFL. And when you follow where the revenue's going, when you understand what gambling is going to do to the value of teams. I had someone suggest to me not too long ago that these teams are going to be worth $7 billion or more each before too long, once the gambling industry really matures and is in enough states and they start making money over money over money and the teams identify the revenue streams. $12 million a year for a head coach is nothing. You're paying backup quarterbacks $12 million a year. Coach is far more important than backup quarterback. $12 million a year is nothing. I'm surprised it wasn't more than that for Meyer, Charean.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. I think he's worth every penny of it based on what he did in college and what he can do for you in the NFL, or what you can think he can do for you in the NFL. If you're convinced that's the guy who can win, you can win with. And so I think he would be worth every penny of that. If that's the guy you identify as your guy and that's what he wants, and you want him, you go pay what he wants and get him in and hope that he is the right choice. And if he's not, you're going to be paying him off in a few years.
And let me reconcile my 2 points there. I'm not sold that Meyer is going to work at the NFL level, but if you are sold on him, then $12 million a year is not an unreasonable amount to pay. And it appears that Shad Khan and the Jaguars are sold on Urban Meyer, and we'll see if, number one, they can sell him on the job because he still has to decide to do it, and whether or not he can ultimately succeed. But he will have Trevor Lawrence if he wants him, and the Jaguars may become a relevant team far sooner than later in a division that, even though it was very competitive this year, and look, you've got Deshaun Watson, you've got Ryan Tannehill, who knows who the Colts are going to have as their quarterback, but that could be a compelling division with Trevor Lawrence and Urban Meyer in it. We talked earlier about the best openings, and I think that we both are in agreement that it's Jaguars then Chargers, because Jaguars is the biggest open slate. It's an empty palette, and you have the cash and the cap space in the draft picks. Jaguars makes the most sense to me. We agree that the Chargers is second. Beyond that, Charean, I'm not sure what's next. Maybe the Jets. You know, the problem with Lions, Texans, Falcons. And you know, I try to choose my words carefully here. This is a reality, and I mentioned it last night on Football Night in America as it relates to Rich McKay in Atlanta. The more layers there are between the coach and the GM and ownership, the more buffers there are, the more people there are. Whether it's Jack Easterby in Houston, whether it's Rod Wood and Chris Spielman in Detroit, whether it's Rich McKay in Atlanta, that makes the job less attractive. And the average fan doesn't really understand that. But what happens is you're trying to do your job day in and day out. You're trying to run your team. And you've got somebody in between who's got less accountability than you, that think they know better than you, that is whispering to the owner. And to justify their existence, they have to look for things that they can criticize. They have to look for things that they can say they're not doing it right. We need to tell them to do it differently. That creates dysfunction. It is an atmosphere. It is an environment that breeds dysfunction. And I'm telling you, the most competent and capable candidates are looking at those teams, Charean, that have that buffer between the football operations, the coach and the GM, and ownership. And they're saying, if I can take a job where I don't have that extra layer of communication, of complication, I don't want that job.
Yeah, and I love the Houston job simply because you have Deshaun Watson as your quarterback, and we know he's a franchise quarterback. We saw it. He's been terrific, and no one's noticed because they've been so bad, and that defense is in need of a complete rebuild right now. It's awful. They have so many problems. They don't have the number 3 overall pick. They don't have many picks because of all those stupid trades. And Laramie Tunsil, frankly, was not worth the number 3 overall pick. It was stupid. And now you've moved on for that. So if I'm going to Houston, I know I'm going to have all those layers, as you mentioned, and I'm going to have time to rebuild despite having the franchise quarterback in place. So I tell you what, it's going to take a long-term deal for me to do that, where I'm going to have to be an assistant coach who's never had that opportunity before and may never get that opportunity again. And I think that's why Houston ends up with an assistant coach who's never been a head coach before, because they will want that job thinking they can rebuild it and do it over a period of time. It's not going to be done quickly, but over a period of 4 or 5 years. And are you going to get 4 or 5 years? That's my question. And I don't know that you are. I think they're going to expect you to win now because they have been successful over the past few years. But Bill O'Brien, frankly, tore that franchise apart over the last couple of years, Mike.
I'd say the Texans are at a spot where the 49ers were 4 years ago, where they had to give 6-year fully guaranteed contracts both to the coach and the general manager to create the impression that they're not just going to have a revolving door and fire you after a year or two. The wild card in Houston is Jack Easterby, the executive VP of football operations. There's a sense out there that he's not going to be as influential and powerful as people think, and the GM is going to determine his role. I'll believe all that when I see it, because I think there's a broader play going on here to create the impression that Easterby isn't going to have power and control. But when we see who gets hired, it's going to be obvious this is somebody that Easterby signed off on. He's going to be able to maintain his influence without it being obvious, because that's the sweet spot for these folks who have the best jobs in football, where you get paid a hell of a lot of money, where you've got a ton of influence, where you can claim credit when things go well. When it goes sideways, you don't get fired like the coach and the GM. That's the best job to have. That's the job you can have for 15 or 20 years and never get fired. And that is the thing that drives coaches and GMs crazy, because their attitude is, if you're going to have any involvement in football, then you get in the boat with us. And if it sinks, you sink along with it. All right, the names that have been flooding out today, well, we don't need to get into the whole lather, rinse, repeat. We know the usual candidates. We know the names that are going to keep coming up, whether it's Robert Saleh, the defensive coordinator of the Lions, Eric Bieniemy, the Chiefs' assistant coach, offensive coordinator. All the names that we've heard are going to keep coming up, and there's going to be a lot of interviews that unfold. The real thing for me is when it starts to focus on who the candidates are. We're too early in the process. Other than Jacksonville, thanks to Urban Meyer, talking too much, we don't know where the chess pieces are going to go, but that will be determined.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.